All right, we're live.
Here.
We're back. We're back for the second episode of This Week in Higher Ed. Terri, Dr. Terri Givens, how are you doing?
I am doing very well today. It's a sunny day in California and we don't have any smoke.
Nice, nice. The sun came back out in Brooklyn, which is also the name of a screenplay that I'm working on. But yeah, so here we are. We're back for our second episode. First episode felt pretty good. Nice to get episode number 1 under our belts. And this week we can blow out the what we're focusing on. So this is for this week. We're going to have a special guest for the second half, Dr. Maria Andersen, who's the CEO of Coursetune, is going to be on for the second half of our conversation, where she'll talk about what Coursetune is doing. Really interesting work around learning architecture, instructional design, helping universities figure out how to navigate the complexities of moving online. So really interesting conversation, digging in there with Maria. But we wanted to begin with what's going on this week in higher ed. I mentioned for those who saw some of the posts we had coming into this, the ASU-GSV conference began. I guess the pre-launch was last Thursday. And then starting yesterday, there's a ton of virtual sessions for the free online ASU-GSV conference. That'll be interesting to talk about. We also wanted to talk about some of the news around diversity training, where definitely want to hear Terri's perspective on some recent news from the administration and their perspective on that. But we also wanted to begin by thanking our sponsor, EB Lifestyle, which is a design firm who's sponsoring this session. So thanks to EB Lifestyle for their sponsorship. And yeah, with that, what else did I miss, Terri? What else is going on? What else is capturing your imagination these days?
Well, I mean, I've been following what's going on in college football. And of course, we had the announcements from the Big Ten and the Pac-12 about starting up again. So there's a lot of interesting things happening in higher ed. We're getting into a period, though, and obviously some of the reasons for starting football again has to do with the financials. And we're getting into a period in the next few weeks when we're going to be seeing kind of what's going on with enrollment. And whether institutions are really going to be able to survive what's happening with enrollment, and there is an expectation that we're going to see a reduction in enrollment. And actually, one of the more interesting stories I've seen is that even though a lot of people signed up for community college courses or registered for community colleges, they're actually seeing fewer people signing up than they actually showing up to classes than they expected. And so that's an interesting trend we're going to be following really closely. But also some of the small private liberal arts colleges are seeing steady enrollments, but where they're hurting is, of course, not as many students, or they may have no students in housing. And so, again, the housing is losing what they would normally get from housing is a problem.
The community college thing is interesting to me because, there's a lot of talk about the digital divide, but more from the perspective of the students. I think in many cases, community colleges are not as ready to go online. They have tighter budgets. They're maybe more adjunct faculty, like a leaner core team. It's hard for anybody. It's hard for any university to be able to manage the online part. But I think being able to affect that pivot is challenging. And I think, and it's compounded by the fact that their students are more likely to potentially face some challenges around hopping online. I guess it depends. Maybe there are some community colleges with better online programs, but that's the type of stuff that I think would be interesting to talk to Maria about when we get her on in the second half, because I know she's been working with a bunch of different organizations, universities in particular. And are there different types of profiles out there? Like, what's a typical community college? Where are they at in terms of their learning architecture and their ability to go digital versus a small private liberal arts college versus a big public university versus a big private university with an endowment? It does feel like, that's one of the things I am seeing a lot in the ASU-GSV is that it's not a balanced playing field. Like, the impact of COVID to different institutions, particularly coming back to like the elite, like the top 1% who have huge endowments, they probably already had online programs to begin with. navigating this is hard, but they have a lot more of the infrastructure to do it. I think when you sort of slide down to the more, I mean, the big public universities in particular, I think are facing, which is why the Big Ten is an interesting, and the Pac-12 are interesting examples. But then when you go all the way down to like a community college or a small private liberal arts college, it's probably going to be a really mixed bag in terms of how ready people are to go online. Was that your experience, Terry, too? Because I know you were both at a big, UT, big university in Texas. Probably different challenges, different ability to go online, different ability to be agile. And then when you're at Menlo, probably a different dimension. Any perspective on just the readiness based on the type of university, like, and how resilient and agile different types of organizations might be to going online?
Well, actually, I have to say, what surprised me being at a small liberal arts or business college actually is that it wasn't as flexible as I expected. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times that these institutions, you still have some of the same pressures as you have at a big institution. There's the whole issue of shared governance, so you have to work closely with faculty. And that's one of the reasons I went to a small private liberal arts college, was because I felt like, oh, this will be a place where we can, make change quickly and work closely with the faculty, because there aren't that many of them compared to a big institution. And, you think about, the big aircraft carrier versus the small, pilot, ship or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, so it was really interesting to learn that a lot of times there's still inertia, there's this is the way we've always done things, stuff, or a focus on some aspects of the institution that may not be as, amenable to change.
Yeah, so, and it's one of the reasons why I think it helps to have outside parties. You and I are both kind of in that position. So is Maria. Like having someone outside of the sort of the politics and the infrastructure of change management. Frequently, I know when I was in the private sector, that was one of the reasons why you bring consultants in. Like when you can't necessarily navigate the decision-making and rule by committee within an organization, frequently that's when you need outside help. So and the other thing I saw recently, which I was somewhat hopeful for me, was that there was a survey, I'll have to dig up where I saw this, but there was a survey of different types of organizations around the level of optimism for the next 6 months, 6 to 12 months. And small organizations and sole proprietors were more optimistic than bigger organizations. And I think that's partly because the ability to be nimble and opportunistic, I think, is there when you're smaller. Once you start to reach a certain level of critical mass, there's more inertia that you kind of have to navigate. So yeah. Oh, I see a question from Taryn. Do you see that question, Terry?
I do. How does a school finds itself cut out during COVID work to avoid a similar situation in the future? Well, I think, a lot of institutions are dealing with that issue now. And first of all, I think one of the things that we have to look at more broadly for higher ed is how we do strategic planning. And every campus, will have a strategic plan. But, I've talked about this a lot because it's a big issue. Strategic plans tend to be something we do one time and stick it up on a shelf, and it sits on a shelf for 5 or 10 years. And we need to move to a more agile. I will use the term agile because I work with some guys who are working on agile.
You're Silicon Valley, baby. You got to say agile. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think the first step is to become more agile and to create the integrated teams across an institution that can, respond more quickly. Or as Maria's jumping in, possibly hiring a project manager for the strategic plan, because I actually, when I was at Menlo College, tried to implement some software, project management software, that would have allowed us to track and make sure that we had clear steps but I had a really hard time because the underlying issue is accountability. And one of the reasons these schools are finding themselves cut out during COVID is because it's not clear who is responsible for what, who's responsible for making sure that we're ready to jump online. And, frankly, we were having these discussions about being able to shift to online years ago because of wildfires here
Right.
in California.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a situation when students can't figure out that, or can't get on can't get to classes. I'm losing my speech ability. Can't get to classes because of smoke or earthquake or whatever it may be.
Right.
We're talking about, do we have the ability for faculty to get online and do these courses online? And so that's something we should have been doing, because there's natural disasters. There's so many different things that can lead to us needing to teach online. So it's just it's unfortunate that we were caught.
Yeah. Well, and I think lots of times the structures don't exist. Like maybe there's a Center for Teaching and Learning, and there's an instructional designer who's spread across like the entire university or a department, and suddenly everybody needs help. And the help is also seen frequently as like IT support, not actually instructional design, not actually the learning architecture side of the equation, mapping it to learning objectives and outcomes. If there isn't someone who that's their job, maybe that rolls up to the provost ultimately, but provost got so many things to juggle these days. It's an interesting time for sure. And then the other thing we did want to mention at least was like this ASU-GSV conference, which we'll share some of the links there so that you can register. It's free and it's online. Traditionally, it was $3,000 and in San Diego or Salt Lake City or wherever it was. But it was very much for like business development people more senior in ed tech, maybe senior members in the administration. I know you had attended, Terri, but it didn't. You were kind of an outlier, right? Like typically, ASU-GSV was more of the partnerships, a lot of guys in suits, having private meetings to talk about venture capital. Right. That's still part of it, but it does feel like going online has made this conference more accessible, and they're just pumping out so much content. Some of it's good, a lot of it's just kind of overwhelming, and then all the videos are available. So like I thought it was good for this audience to at least understand that it's there if they haven't seen this conference, because it is a place where you can do more with inclusion when you go online. You can actually at least make the opportunity there for folks who can hop in if they haven't seen this type of stuff. And I would encourage folks, if you're just an instructor, if you're a professor, if you've never really gone to these types of EdTech conferences, some of the content's pretty interesting. And there's a lot of stuff about social emotional learning. There's a lot of stuff about the COVID response. I saw a really interesting panel yesterday on the workforce side about organizations that don't include childcare as a benefit and aren't empathetic to parents who are facing new challenges, are to lose out to organizations that are able to think that way. So if you do, I know everyone's busy, but if you do have time to kind of like hop in and just cherry pick a few of these sessions, I think you can feel more like you're at the cutting edge. What's been your impression? I know it just started, and it's definitely drinking from the fire hose, but
yeah, I know. Well, I went into one of the first sessions yesterday, and then they have the breakout rooms, and you look, and this was true when I went there, in person as well. I went to San Diego a year and a half ago. And it's just this huge, but the worst, actually, the nice thing, at least this year, is that you can actually go to the sessions. Last year, the sessions would get filled and then you couldn't get in. And so there were a lot of sessions I wanted to go to that I couldn't go to because I didn't get there fast enough.
Right.
And also, I should mention the networking, because there is great opportunities to network with people. I haven't really tried it out myself yet. I've meant to go last evening, but other things got in the way. But I highly recommend trying to reach out and connect with people. But what struck me so far, I listened a bit this morning to Michael Sorrell, who's the president of Paul Quinn College, which is
Yes,
a
right.
private HBCU, and he's always an inspiring speaker. He's
Absolutely.
he's one of my favorite people in higher ed.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
he's the one who came out and said, you know, we shouldn't be, you know, we should be thinking about the students and COVID.
Yeah, he famously converted his football field into like a agriculture kind of farm. He's
basically
a real innovator. Yeah.
Yeah, he is one of the most innovative people in higher ed. So he's always gets invited to these venues. And so, you know, I watched his talk this morning. I watched a little bit of Michael Crow and Valerie Jarrett. Oh, no, actually, that was Valerie Jarrett was speaking to the guy from 2U, who's Skip Pacek.
Yeah, Chip Pacek. Yeah.
I should know. I interviewed him on our podcast. But, yeah, I think one of the interesting things about ASU-GSV is it's so broad, right?
Yeah.
There's everything is there. So it's not just higher ed. It's not just K through 12. It's politics. It's, you know, just about everything.
Workforce. Yeah. Even pre-K. I saw like with a 2-year-old, I figured out how woefully uninformed I am about early childhood education, but there's a ton of that going on too. Yeah.
Yes, it's true. You can find just about anything there. And the good news is this year it's free. It's usually a very expensive conference to go to.
And another theme that's there, Terri, is diversity and inclusion. They did say that every panel had at least some representation from like non-white men, basically. Like which isn't that high a bar, but it's still better than. Because there is that feeling, and again, I've learned to notice this feeling, but I see it now. Like when you see a panel and they're all white guys talking to each other, I think there is a certain level of disengagement that many of us are starting to feel. Even some white guys are starting to notice that and feel uncomfortable in those contexts. But certainly others haven't had the opportunity to not notice that. But we did want to talk a bit about some of the news that's been out there around diversity programs, whether it's
anti-racist programs,
anti-racism or implicit bias training. The Trump administration came out very strongly about that, and bigly, yes, all that huge messages about this, and we definitely want to make sure we grabbed a few minutes on that before we brought Maria in to go deeper on the Coursetune side of the conversation. So any thoughts from you?
I mean, it's really interesting because I people on Twitter are saying, well, it's really interesting that, you know, we're saying that anti-racist diversity programming is racist. That's basically what the administration is saying. And you know, the reality is these kinds of actually, I'm curious. I meant to check on this before we talked, but I haven't had a chance. One of the issues, for example, is that the state of California requires, you know, this kind of training. You know, and it's more legalistic in the sense that it focuses on kind of the legal requirements for avoiding discrimination. So it's really more anti-discrimination training.
And harassment and all that.
And all that. So, you know, in the state of in many states, and actually, you know, when I was at University of Texas at Austin, we had to take this kind of training to learn, you know, what are the legal requirements around discrimination and so on. And so, you know, the diversity training takes it one step further and says, no, we want to learn to develop a culture of, you know, diversity. And, you know, it really revolves around the fact that we're becoming a more diverse country. But, you know, I live in Silicon Valley. I can look around and see, you know, boards and CEOs, you know, whole companies are lacking in diversity. And so the idea is let's learn how to, you know, it's important, right? Our country is not going to survive if we exclude a huge percentage of, you know, is now becoming the majority of people from these kinds of positions. And it's important in education, of course, as well. So, you know, it's really dismaying that this is a target.
Although I will say some of the pushback was a little bit heartening, like particularly seeing that the armed services place that has been historically really at the forefront of like integration, diverse groups, you know, like it is. There are a lot of the military. You have to learn how to deal with diversity and learn how to work together. Really rely on people, you know, for your safety and your survival. And it was interesting to see that, of course, how any sort of pushback happens and how policies actually get changed versus, like, I think it was an executive order that kind of got a lot of the ball rolling on this. And it was also interesting on the workforce side, which is the other reason why, I do think to play with your head up in higher ed and understand that, like, the challenges within higher ed are not limited to higher ed, particularly on the diversity side, diversity training side, is really kind of heartening in that you can see that you may feel alone fighting this fight if you're in in an organization where you're the only person who identifies the way that you do. But I find hope in seeing that there is some pushback. And what I find most frustrating is that it's just an edict. And it's like, I don't even have time to understand, you write about empathy, the idea that you can't even empathize, you're immediately looking at your own pain and your own discomfort with the conversation, which, truth be told, it is hard to sometimes come to terms with your own biases, but it is part of your own growth. And then to not be open to even having the conversation, because even if the administration were to say, we're questioning the efficacy of this, there have been questions about whether implicit bias actually, that particular flavor of training works,
Exactly.
Yeah. So any other beats on that? Other thoughts? Any other sessions? Any other ideas? Top of mind? We could spend more time on this, obviously, and we'll probably want to do a deeper dive on diversity as a topic. Get back into this with some more detail. Also, if anyone in the chat has any thoughts, But any other thoughts from you, Terri, on this?
Well, I would just say that we'll be having more discussions about this. It's an ongoing issue, and it's part of both what you and I do in general is diversity drives a lot of the work that we do in education more broadly. But in terms of ASU-GSV, I was very heartened by the fact that they really did. Because what ASU-GSV did is a part of what I try to teach about, when I do workshops and so on, which is that we have to be intentional. The way they got those panels, we talk about manels, and the way you get, past that issue of having all white males on panels is you have to be intentional. You have to say, and you can't say, oh, I can't find anybody. It's like,
right.
There's lots and lots and lots of people out there. There was an article that talked about one of the top people in Wells Fargo was saying they don't have diversity because there aren't people. We can't find anybody. So he got dragged on LinkedIn and Twitter for that because it's like we are here. I'm sorry. Right. If you look at the numbers of people from underrepresented backgrounds graduating from higher ed, it's the numbers are there.
Right.
They're just not looking in the right places, and or they're a lot of times that's an excuse, and so we need to get past those excuses. But
and just sort of along similar lines, like when you get even broader about inclusion, the fact that I saw a graduate assistant from MIT presenting on like robotics and AI. I think there's more educators who are getting panel spots. I think when you start to extend, I think Terrence making the comment in chat, like when you extend beyond like the board members or CEOs of organizations that you want to make sure maybe they're sponsors, like there are reasons the whole mechanics of conferences tend to source the same profiles over and over again. I did notice, I won't give them an A+, but I will give them like an E for effort, or at least an effort thumbs up to ASU-GSV, because it does feel like they're starting to get it. I'm just not sure ultimately, if it's going to change where the EdTech capital goes, which is the reason why this is an interesting conference to watch if you're thinking about starting a company or if you're potentially looking for funding. A lot of it comes out of meetings that traditionally would happen while the conference was going on. It's another thing that I'm really curious about. We could probably track over time too, is, what happens to the networking stuff that used to happen in the comfort of a conference when it moves to like speed dating in Zoom? Is it as effective? Is it not as effective? Conference organizers are are really grappling with this. And even the fact that ASU-GSV, they have 8 concurrent sessions happening at the same time, which is totally overwhelming, but it's kind of fun to crowd surf. Like, it is fun. It reminds me of when I used to go to Jazz Fest in New Orleans. Like, you just you get a taste of everything without really digesting the entirety of it. But like, it's a good way to kind of get a feel for what's emerging in the world around us. So more to come on all that.
And I want to answer Terrence's next question before we move on. Yeah. She said, she's asking me, as a successful speaker, how did you get started speaking to conferences, and did you just answer a call for proposals? And basically, it's word of mouth. That's a good and bad, right? So the way that you get invited to things is usually because somebody asks, but that's why, you have to be intentional about the diversity, right? So you have to expand your network of people you ask. And so I've joined several organizations that, basically a friend said, I would join this entity and maybe. And so, but most of my speaking engagements are because of people I know in higher ed. I think that we're at a point, maybe hopefully a tipping point, where we're seeing more women and people of color getting invited to these things. But we get to see Michael Sorrell at almost every single higher ed. I love Michael Sorrell, but I know there are other, I've had some really good discussions with other people, James Moore at Ohio State. There's like new, there are, presidents and women of color at lots of institutions that are doing really cool things, and it'd be fun to see some of them getting invited to these events as well.
Yeah, well, and at the same time, I think the barrier to entry to do your own thing, whether it's your own podcast or host webinars, what we're doing here, is getting easier. So hopefully we'll be able to, walk the walk in terms of who we wind up talking to and what topics we cover. But that is another thing that I am interested in too. Like, it does feel like just ASU-GSV can go so big because they have all the quote unquote 8-listers. But I think there's a lot of emerging talent who are going to have access to platforms like this moving forward. So that's kind of hopeful, and that's also an open invite to folks if they want to opt in, or if they're interested in appearing on the show. We'd love to hear more ideas, whether you want to do it or whether you have a suggestion, someone you think would be a great guest. But I think, speaking of that, maybe we could bring in a great guest. What do you think about that?
I love that idea, because this is one of my new favorite people in higher ed.
Wow.
And we have Maria Andersen. Yay.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
So any initial impressions? I know we definitely want to hear your origin story, your hero's tale, hero's quest, if you will, what got you to where you are. But any initial impressions on anything we talked about so far before we dive in there?
I was jotting down some notes while you guys were talking, and I've been to GSV, and it is an interesting experience, very different than the normal educational conference for sure. And certainly some of Terry's comments about the panels and whatnot were resonating with me. But I have to say that also just one of the things that I find hard about conferences is the panels, period, because they tend to be just a collection of 5 or 6 10-minute presentations, 5 minutes of each, which is, let me tell you about myself, right? And that's not very useful. I mean, you can't walk away from those panels with any useful understanding of any of the subject areas. And I think that panels can actually be better designed. And
I agree.
One of the things that I do when I am moderating a panel or on a panel is get everybody to write down or contribute what they want to talk about. And then we figure out who has overlap. And then we craft questions that will lead everybody to have 2 chances to say something that's like near and dear to them, without everybody piling on a yes, me too on every comment, right? So everybody knows they're going to be able to say something that's appropriate and furthers the conversation and gets everybody further. And that's been my biggest issue with conferences like GSV and South by Southwest. And the panels are just exhausting.
Yeah, I've seen a mixed bag. I think you're right. I think there's some that are better, but I think frequently it's when people already know each other. I think frequently the unless there's a really good moderator, if people haven't connected before, it feels almost like an awkward outing. And then everyone's very much focused on they're not necessarily listening to each other. They're just preparing to say their own thing.
Yeah.
Clearly you, Maria, have been listening to the entirety of this conversation. So good job by you. But can you introduce yourself and let folks know a little bit about who you are, how you got here?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Coursetune. We're a company that develops learning design software. So we help you to create the curriculum architecture, from learning objectives to course objectives, program outcomes, alignment to professional standards, outside standards, workforce skills, etc. And we came about in late 2016 because there is a real need to have software that does this. All of the folks who are trying to do curriculum design are doing it in spreadsheets and documents. And spreadsheets were, you may not know this, but spreadsheets were designed for the financial industry and the business industry. And they don't have the right kinds of structures and fields to easily do curriculum design. And by that, I mean things like you may, a college has, a calculus class, and a calculus class is used by the math department, by the physics department, by the chemistry department, by the economics department. So that class is included in every program that I just talked about as part of their program, mapped to their professional standards and their program standards, and spreadsheets don't let you do that, right?
Right.
You can make 100 spreadsheets and one spreadsheet for every program, but then you have to remember, if you change that calculus class on spreadsheet 1, that you've got to go change it on spreadsheets 2 through 100, right? And that doesn't happen, and it just creates kind of a disaster in planning. And then the other problem we really wanted to overcome was that you can't ever really see the architecture. You can't really grok it. There's not a one view version of it. And so we really wanted to solve that. Even when you build an online course in something like your learning management system of choice, you can't see the whole thing at once. The best you can do is see how many modules there are. But you have to open a module to see the pages, and you have to open the pages to see the learning objectives. You have to open the assignments to see if they're, assessments or learning activities. And you never can see the whole thing at once. And it's just maddening as an instructor to have to hold this entire architecture in your head, and try to find things and change things and improve on things and keep notes in your head for, oh, I should remember to change this next semester. I mean, how many of us who have taught have had this experience where we think like, oh, I got to remember to change this project next semester. Next semester rolls around, project gets assigned, and you're like, oh, as you're grading it, you're like, I remember I meant to change this, right? And so we wanted a place where you could not only keep your architecture, but also, take notes on your architecture, leave yourself to-do lists for next time around. You can share it with your instructional designer or whoever else may help you with the project, the next implementation. I mean, sometimes we go a year without teaching the class again, and you don't remember, especially in 2020, like who remembers what they thought to change fall of last year? Like nobody, right? We really believe in continuous improvement, in really knowing what's in your course architecture, your program architecture. And I truly believe that if you have paid attention to the internal alignment of courses and the alignment of courses to programs, and their outcomes in the workplace, that what you get is a more engaging and efficient student experience. And that really benefits outcomes, right? Because if students feel like they're not doing a lot of busy work and that they are engaged by the curriculum they have, then they're more likely to succeed.
This
is what I refer to as the hard work of curriculum. Like, we are past all the low-hanging fruits in education. Like, we look at click data, so we know whether students have clicked in the LMS. We know whether students have communicated with instructors via various systems, right? What we don't actually know is what the curriculum actually is. That is the hard work. It involves dragging some things out of faculty that are difficult to do, but armed with that full curriculum architecture, you could start to mix and match, make new programs, certificates, design new experiences for students. Can't do any of that if you don't know what's there.
Yeah, and then how did you get to that place too? Because I think you picked up with what Coursetune is and founded in 2016, but what was your backstory to kind of get you to the place where you founded the company?
So I actually had to write down my steps here because I couldn't quite remember the order, but I started teaching online in 2007. I worked at a community college as full-time faculty for 10 years. And when I started teaching online, I decided that if I was going to do it, I was going to do it as well as face-to-face, like no questions. I was just going to keep looking for the right tools and techniques until I could do it. I taught Calculus 1 and 2 online for the community college till left in 2012. During that time, I also ran a math and technology workshop every summer to help instructors from all over the country learn how to teach online. And that was a really good immersive experience in knowing what's going on campuses all over the country, their internal struggles, their curriculum battles. There's a lot of curriculum battles in math. We've gone through this whole like leave dev math behind, adopt new programs, and sponsored by various organizations. Some people are willing. You've got hostages who are doing it unwillingly. And so just watching all of those battles and hearing about them from people all over the country for 5 years was really kind of probably laid some foundational work in my mind for what we had as problems. And then I went to work for Instructure, and I worked specifically on Canvas Network. So then I had to design all sorts of different courses very quickly and get them to work online, right? For large populations too. And so, going through kind of a QA process for those, for a lot of instructors is like the very first time they had ever had anybody do a quality assurance check on their class, right? And so, despite giving them a heads up that like, here's the checks we're going to go through, many of them chose to ignore those checks completely. And, we'd have to have difficult conversations about, hey, we actually need some of these things in the class. And then watching those classes launch, it was like watching little big instructional design experiments launch one after another. So every week you'd learn new things about what worked and didn't work. And then then you'd like quickly let all the instructors know who were launching the next week. Try it again, see how it worked, try it again, see how it works. So it's this very rapid development cycle where we kind of learned from our mistakes very quickly in how we could improve the class. Every week we could improve the next class. I went from there to work for an adaptive learning company. So I had a lot of time spent doing the architecture of learning down to the adaptive learning level, which is like sub-objectives, right? And really outlining all of the substructure of learning. There are some really interesting, I think, implications of adaptive, and I'm not sure we're quite to where we need to be yet. I was just reading yesterday an article about YouTube's early days and how they, if user clicks video A and then clicks video B, send all users down that path, right? And I immediately had this sinking feeling in my gut, because what it did at YouTube was it sent people down rabbit holes, right? Rabbit holes of really bad conspiracy theory videos, right? Yeah. And when you start to do that, you're relying on the majority making a decision for everybody. And if you think about what that means, like for example, for like a low-level math class, if you have a bunch, say 50% of your students follow the path A, C, E, F, right? That could just be because 50% of the students have a stronger math background. That doesn't mean everybody should follow the path A, C, D, F, right? Right. If you ignore the demographics of your population and their prior knowledge and their life experiences and how they, there's just some real dangers here with trusting in algorithms completely to do this work. And I think that's, again, where like you see some of those elements in Coursetune, I think, because we believe that experts in the field who have worked with real human students for decades do know something about what a natural order for some things are. And yes, some students might be able to skip steps in some of those paths, but not all of them. And a student who's a complete newbie to the field needs all the steps, right?
Right.
So I don't think we can trust majority rules algorithms in these decisions at all. And so then my final step before Coursetune was as the director of learning design for Western Governors University. And so there I got like a crash course PhD in competency-based learning design.
Right.
Not really a PhD, but I call it a crash course PhD because that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
And I was working with about 45 staff in instructional design and learning experience design across all of the colleges at WGU, with 108 different vendors who provided technology for the classes, and trying to solve all of the different learning problems in all of our different subject areas, right? And so that was just like a vast exposure to the different curriculum architectures you see in a variety of subjects, right?
And WGU is known as an industry leader in higher ed, online education. So folks who don't know WGU, Maria
Governors University.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, it's definitely a good one to kind of ramp on, and it'd be fun to get more of your perspective on that as well. But Terri, we got to balance our talk time, So I'm gonna be like a mouse. Yeah.
Okay, fine. But no, I got excited about the work that Maria and her company is doing. We actually, full disclosure, we met on Brian Alexander's webcast, and it was just one of these random things where we both happened to be chatting. But I got excited about her company because as a provost, I've experienced having to try and pull faculty. I had the accreditors breathing down my neck about getting our course and program learning outcomes done, and I'm trying to pull my faculty, into this new world, really, for so many of them, of accreditation and assessment. And actually, one of the first things we did when I created the Center for Higher Education Leadership, now known as Brighter Higher Ed, is create an assessment guide, because I know so many faculty who don't, we don't learn about this in graduate school. Again, one of those things, besides, we don't learn a whole lot about teaching. And, I really am pushing for graduate education to start taking these things into consideration. Yes, I'm a political scientist, but I'm also going to be a teacher. And I need to know what it means to teach and how to, do this kind of work in assessment and understand what we're in we talk about innovation and college survival. Well, this is one of those things that has to happen. I mean, we can't move forward as institutions without having this the accreditors are still requiring us to do it, regardless of what what the financial situation is. So we got to invest in this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not really a question for Maria.
No, but it's talk time, which is a start. It's a start. But yeah, Maria. So what we talked a little bit while we were prepping. In March, everybody was caught off guard. People had to move suddenly. I imagine the types of engagements, what March was like through, say, the summer was one scenario. Now we're starting the fall where folks might have had a little bit of time, but everyone's still been shook and not really sure what they're designing for. Can you talk a little bit about the different design windows, how much time you need, how to do it right? How do you actually get the learning architecture? Like if you want to work with an organization or you want to work with a school, how early in the process or how late in the process can they reach out to you? Do you have some examples based on your experience? Yep.
So the first thing to say is that we start by trying to minimize the pain around getting your data into some kind of organized structure. So the first thing we do with clients is say, just send us all the files. Spreadsheets, PDFs, Word docs, whatever you have from whatever your programs and courses are, just send those to us and we will make them appear inside of Coursetune with all of the data that's appropriate for learning architecture. And so, that is done by us to lighten the load on institutions because the data is so disparate across even courses in the same department often, right? So that gives schools a starting place for where is your architecture right now. And then we work with schools to set kind of milestones for what they want to accomplish when. And usually one of their first steps is to flesh out some of the architecture that's missing, because there's always some of that architecture that's missing. So that's like, knowing what the learning objectives are in the courses, and whether the learning objectives actually feed into the stated course objectives, which is a real thing at many institutions. I have actually taught courses at institutions where the institution says, I say, these course objectives don't seem to match what we're actually teaching in this course. And they'll say, yeah, those are from 10 years ago. We haven't updated them. Just put them on the syllabus. And you're like, okay. So just imagine if you're going to develop a new certificate program or a new degree program to try to keep up with the changing world, and you're the provost or you're the dean, you're looking through the syllabi you have, and these classes say one thing, but in reality, they do something completely different. That doesn't make any sense. And so we often find that the first step in the process is really looking at, people come at it from two ways. Some people start at the course level and really look at the internal alignment of courses, whether what's there is correct. Do they need to make some changes? They often have to articulate the learning objectives better so that they can start to do things like add learning and assessment activities to them. We have a platform that actually kind of forces you to choose which learning objectives go with your assessment or go with your discussion. Or like we don't think that you should just say, I'm going to have 4 exams.
Well,
because 4 exams actually cover.
I mean, a lot of it frequently is just implicit knowledge within the faculty, right? Like they don't know, they don't know the time. They know the curriculum. They're under the gun. Pressures and different. They
know the curriculum. I don't know if anybody actually knows the curriculum at most schools. If you have 4 different chemistry teachers teaching intro chem, do you actually know that they all know what the curriculum is supposed to be?
Sure.
I mean, probably in intro chem you do, but what about as you move up the levels? And plus, talk to each other as much, and there's less coordination.
Exactly, and that should be happening at the level of the department, but often the department chair doesn't understand, how to coordinate the different aspects of the, they know we have like I'm a political scientist, so we have American politics and comparative politics, but within that there isn't necessarily a curriculum. There's classes that have to be taught because there's certain maybe state requirements, and then there's classes that professors want to teach, and so but the other component of that is it's what's in the course catalog, and it's so hard to change what's in the course catalog because you have to go through the higher education coordinating board to even just change a class. So a lot of this has to do with the structures. But I want to make sure we save a little time to talk about this whole issue of, how does that curriculum then lead to employability? Because when I was at the University of Texas at Austin and we tried to start a couple of new majors, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board kept pushing back on us and saying, okay, you can start this major, but you have to be able to tell us what kind of jobs can somebody get if they take this set of classes.
So I want to actually take that I want to just clarify one thing and then take this a step further, what you just asked. I don't think that curriculum should dictate exactly what assignments and exactly what projects anybody should have. The curriculum should just detail what they should be learning, right? The choice of how to do that, how to actually implement that learning and assessment should be the instructors. And that's where the academic freedom comes in. It should not be in the choice of what is taught in intro chemistry. It should be in the choice of how you teach it, right? Okay, so going on to the workplace, I think that we have a very fast-moving job market now. Jobs are being created and destroyed at a very rapid rate. We've seen from the past that just because the world becomes more productive, it doesn't mean the jobs necessarily become easier to get, or they often require more skills than the job the person lost required. And so I think we actually need to throw back to a model that we already know a little bit. I think 4-year schools need to start thinking about giving 2-year degrees. And the reason they need to do that is they need to acknowledge that not all students can actually afford to spend 4 full years in school. Like imagine as an adult with kids and a job and a family and parents to take care of, that you are faced with the only way you can get a better job is taking 4 years full time out of your life. That's not doable. And many of these high paying jobs are very highly technical jobs. I mean, you cannot be trained for them in like 10 hours a week pretending to be full time, right? Like it just doesn't work. And so I think we need to create kind of like milestone associate's degrees on the way to 4-year degrees, which would have the effect that a student could go back to school for 2 years, much shorter period of time, while working some low-end job to keep food on the table, right?
Right.
And then get this milestone degree, which lets them level up to a better job that they can then work towards that 4-year degree, maybe over 3 years or something, right? While they work a better job. So how do we get people in just 1 or 2 years to a better job on the way to the 4-year degree, right? And associate's degrees were actually the perfect way to do that if we actually provide enough skills in that associate's degree to do it, right?
Right.
Because associate's degrees transfer nicely, right? So even if you switch schools, you get to transfer in all your general eds, right?
Right.
No questions asked. It was an associate's degree. You're done. So I think, if you look at, specific degree programs, for example, I wrote down a couple, like a degree in business, like a 4-year degree in business. In 2 years, you could probably learn enough, if it was structured right, to be a good office manager, a good project manager, a social media writer, a good salesperson. Like if we structured the first 2 years so you took enough classes to be useful to a business, you could level up to one of those jobs, right? If you looked at something like computer science, well, a stepping stone degree might be something like web development, which you learn some programming for, but not all the programming for a CS degree, right? Or database management, or you could learn how to be a QA engineer. Nice, good paying job on your way to learning a full programming background, right? And so I think we could do these with all of our 4-year degrees. And what this forces is every 4-year degree program to actually pay attention to what? Workplace skills. Right? Tell me in the first 2 years what skills you're going to give me that help me get a better job when I'm halfway through this degree. On my way to my ultimate goal, right? And so I think that's really where we might have been failing students, is that we do so much around general eds those first 2 years. And we can still do general eds, but maybe we need to have general eds with a small focus. You get 4 semesters. So what skills could you teach in 4 successive semesters that would give somebody a leg up in the job field, right?
Especially if, when that's combined with some kind of internship or, some kind of real world training, like those are some of the models that we're really fascinated by. That's part of why Terri and I have connected on this show. Like there's not enough attention. That's why ASU-GSV is exciting, because at least there's different ideas getting out there, because I think it's been a very rigid ecosystem. If you look at higher ed over the last, say, 20, 30 years, like a little bit of online, the MOOCs happen, but it's kind of been the same old. Do you have any perspective on how much of a game changer you think COVID is, and the opportunity? Because there's the forcing function, everybody's getting pushed online, but on the other side, budgets are getting squeezed. So I don't know if you have any perspective on how innovation is going to happen, where to look for the innovation, what kind of partners you're finding out there. I'd love any perspective you might have on that.
Sure. Let me bring it back to one more thing and then go to your question.
Please.
So I just want to bring it back to Coursetune for a second, because what we can do in Coursetune is let you list all those workplace skills that you want students to have, field by field or job by job, however you'd like to do it, and then align curriculum to those skills. So you can actually say, all right, we want to aim for office manager. What classes could somebody take to help them start to become an office manager, right? So that's one of the benefits of actually knowing what's in your curriculum. So COVID, I think it's pushed higher education forward by about a decade of what it would have to take naturally to do that, which is for higher ed actually probably a really good thing, because we were moving too slowly with regards to adoption of technology. And the reason we need to have adopted that technology is because we need to be more flexible to students. One of the reasons WGU has been so spectacularly successful is because they go after the some college, no degree population that is working and taking care of family and, very, very busy. And it provides a way for them to take classes, right? Well, I think a lot of people would be willing to take classes from a college, more traditional college, if they didn't have to get childcare and battle traffic to get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, we finally have an embrace that remote learning is a possibility. There's some of us who've been experimenting with for years. I've been using remote learning for years. Like when I go to a conference, I've always remoted into a classroom to teach the students. I try to never cancel any classes, right?
Yeah.
And then, if they're sick, if they're unable to come, they've always been able to remote into my classes because I knew how to use the technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now everybody knows how to use the technology.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're going to see from students is more of a even once everything returns to normal, please let everything return to normal one day.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see students pushing well, I can't be there in person, but can't I just remote in?
Yeah.
Like they all know it's possible too now, right?
Yeah. We can't say that's not possible anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think offering remote classes is actually more engaging than asynchronous classes for most people. Asynchronous classes are still part of the mix because some folks need a very flexible time schedule. Others are able to say I can actually make a class every morning at noon or every day at noon. And that works great. I can take my lunch break. I can do class. It's what I want to do. I want to have that synchronous experience.
Right.
But that's the bigger issue, right? Is that learning shouldn't end, right? We should make learning accessible to anybody who wants it. And that was kind of the idea behind the MOOCs. But then people know that they have to have that credibility behind it. So why wouldn't an institution say, okay, and before I get to that, though, I want to make two other points. First of all, we have to deal with the graduation rate crisis, right? And that's the other reason for making it more flexible, allowing students, to take courses when they can, versus the strict, you have to take 15 credits every semester, or, and that's part of that has to do with financial aid. But then there's the financial aid component is that we have a debt crisis. And so we need to make, flexibility, allowing people to get a degree after 2 years, it deals with so many of the really bad issues we are dealing with in higher ed around retention and student debt and
affordability, right?
Yeah, affordability.
Yeah. Well, I think if you can let people, or even go after this model that it's okay to go maybe 2 years full time and then go to 3 years part time or something like that, right? Where you can so you only have to sprint at the low paying job for 2 years, right?
Right.
And then you get a leg up. Now you go a little slower, but you do it for 3 years or 4 years or whatever it takes, right? I think we just need to acknowledge that now you're going to go back to school multiple times. And if you're going to go back to school multiple times, 4 years at a time, it is not going to do it.
Right.
So how else can we do this? I think the other problem we're starting to run into is that information is building up so fast now that nobody can stay current in their fields anymore. And so I think that's also an opportunity for higher ed to grab onto. If you go back and watch my talks, while I was at Canvas back in 2012 and 2013, I was advocating for using MOOCs as a way to keep alumni up to date on skills. Take your professors who really would love to teach seminar courses on the latest and greatest stuff coming out and have them do a once a year MOOC for all of your alumni that updates them on things that have happened in the last year in your field, right? And then the professor gets to teach something they absolutely love. It ensures the professors stay up to date in their fields because of doing this, and you're connecting your alumni back to your university, right?
Right.
I mean, you could do it on a subscription model. You could have it be part of an alumni package where when you're a donor, you get access. There's so many opportunities on this one. And the one I like best is you're then mining your alumni group for speakers, for your classes, for connections, for internships. By bringing those graduates back in year after year to get their it's like an annual checkup, to get your annual update. You you reap the rewards
Yeah.
of that benefit, right? So that there are things we should be doing in education that we're not doing. But again, we don't know what's in the classes right now.
Right.
It's like a fundamental problem at the base of everything.
Yeah.
We don't know what the curriculum is at so many institutions.
Right.
And so I mean, the institutions that we work with, they are starting to know what's there. They're starting to see the gaps easier. They're starting to be able to see the internal misalignments, the misalignments in programs, the programs that have, too much, like, oh, we teach this like 10 times and we don't need to. Why are we doing that, right? Mm-hmm. And so getting, again, back to that efficient, engaging curriculum, it needs to be useful. It needs to align to workplace skills, right? We need to get there in education.
And I hate to cut this short, but we're at 1 o'clock already.
Yeah, look at that. We're at 4 o'clock on the East Coast even.
Yeah, so all I care about is
it's all good. We're included from time zones, but yeah. So thank you very much for your time. And Maria, if folks want to learn more, we mentioned Coursetunes. Your website is
Coursetune.com.
Coursetunes.com.
No S. Coursetune.com.
Coursetune.com.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. And thanks very much. Thanks to our sponsors, EB Lifestyle. Thanks as always to Terri Gibbons. Thank you for your time. And
I have to note that EB Lifestyle is a interior design and renovation and the real estate development company in France, in the south of France, which is
nice.
Aussi.
It's a beautiful Très Bien website, which folks can also check out there as well. Thanks again, Maria. Thanks, Terri. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll be back again next Wednesday at 12 Pacific, 3 Eastern, and the world's crazy, so we'll have plenty to talk about. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, right. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks.